Hey, welcome back to Everyday Economics. This is the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, publisher of the Center Square. Everyday Economics is brought to you by the Center Square. To support Everyday Economics, please make a tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording this episode on Friday, February 7th. And joining me, as always, my friend, colleague, and co-host, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Dr. O, of course, you do what you do in the housing sector. You do some fine work as an economist at Zillow. And it is time, I guess, really for the housing market to crank up. It's historically been the case that, for whatever reason, like the week after the Super Bowl is kind of the opening salvo of the annual housing market. We are headed, as we're taping this, heading into Super Bowl Sunday. What's the state of the industry? And from what's your take? That's a big question. You can chip away at it as you like, and let's just have a conversation about it.
Yeah, totally. We're seeing a cool down. I think we're seeing a cool down in on the demand side for sure. New listings are slightly up from a year ago, but they're not up a lot. But inventory has ticked higher in January, and part of the reason why you'd have inventory high. Well, you think about it, if you get a big jump in the number of sellers coming on the market. Even holding the demand side constant, right? Then you end up with more inventory on the market. If you have the number of sellers kind of stuck, and you get a slowdown on the demand side, then you get a big increase in inventory, right?
Right.
For people not buying as many homes means that homes on the market take longer to sell, they accumulate, and you get an increase in inventory. Inventory is up 19% when compared to last year.
Let me throw a perspective at you. So the mortgage, like the mortgage producers, their trade association, they had a story that published yesterday, so February 6th, and the quote, basically the headline of this story was this quote from the CEO of First American Properties, Michael Isinga, and hopefully I'm not destroying Michael's last name. His quote is, "We are witnessing the biggest collapse of homebuyer demand in U.S. history. Mortgage applications have dropped by 63% since their pandemic peak, a figure that surpasses the decline seen during the 2008 financial crisis. Compared to pre-pandemic levels, applications remain down by 52%. That's a pretty big statement right there. And that tracks with what you're saying. It doesn't reflect the entirety of the housing market. But existing homes.
It tracks with what I'm saying. I think this is a little bit crazy. I think he's basically saying the market is crashing. I don't agree. I don't think the market is crashing. Yes, things have cooled down tremendously from the peak. Which makes sense. You had mortgage rates. The mortgage rates are at the lowest they had ever been. Right?
Yes. And in fairness, he goes on to that the story goes on to say that again. This is the mortgage producers, and their point of view on this would be, they're part of the business, and it actually says the crisis has been attributed to the combination of high home prices and elevated mortgage rates during the pandemic. Low mortgage rates spurred demand, pushing prices higher. However, in today's market, those same homes have become unaffordable for many potential buyers. A home purchased for $400,000 in 2019 with a 3.5% interest rate resulted in a monthly mortgage payment of $1,796. That same home today, priced at $500,000 with a 7.26% mortgage rate, would cost $3,416. An increase of $1,600 that many households cannot afford. You and I have talked about this ongoing. The price of poker is very different right now.
We have a massive affordability strain. But I disagree to paint a doom and gloom picture when, look, mortgage rates just dropped this past week. And what did we get? an increase in purchase applications, right? So I think there's a couple of things to think about. The first one is we're not yet in the middle of the home shopping season. Things have slowed down a little bit because mortgage rates had been on the rise uh, in December. And by the way, if you look at housing sales have actually surprised on the upside, both in November and December. And which brings me to think like, hey, well, potentially people going into the new administration worried about tariffs and in potentially higher interest rates may have pulled their purchases forward a little bit, which is why we may have seen the big uptick in sales in November and December, right? So I'm not there yet. And then at the same time, we're now seeing mortgage rates decline again, right? At the end of the month, they had been rising for most of January, and then we start to see them decline again the first week of February. And of course, the decline with lots of buyers on the sidelines waiting for their opportunity, the slight decline in mortgage rates is bringing people back in the market. So that's the picture. The picture is affordability strained for many people. Those people waiting on the sidelines, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for the math to add up. And when the math does add up, they jump right back in, right? And so that I think that's the picture of the housing market. That's the reality of the housing market today. Another reason to dismiss claims that demand is crashing is the fact that you have builders still able to sell homes, right? It's a math problem. And yeah, I mean, you could argue demand in the pure sense of the word, right? At the current prices and mortgage rates, it's really hard to make the math add up. But buyers are there waiting in the wings. And so every time we see an increase in inventory, softening price growth, some buyers come back in. Every time we see a slight decline in mortgage rates, you see buyers come right back in. That's been the story of the housing market for the past few years.
Well, I was going to say maybe forever. I mean, and like historically, I mean, if you can afford it, you do it. And if it's really enticing, like when rates are very low, then you do it.
Different. It's very different from a global financial crisis type of market where basically you had no buyers. You just had no buyers.
Well, yeah, very few. The qualifying market was badly diminished.
You had a bunch of sellers.
Yes.
You had a whole lot of sellers.
Yep.
And just no buyers. Today's completely different. We don't have a lot of sellers, and then we have a lot of buyers just waiting for the opportunity to get their hands on a home. Very different market. In fact, it's what I call a supply constrained housing market, and we're seeing some loosening with inventory rising, but still very much supply constrained in the sense that, buyers are still right there waiting. And every time they get an opportunity, every time a home becomes available, they jump at the opportunity essentially. So you're seeing a small increase in inventory, but you're not seeing a big increase in the number of sellers coming on the market. I saw a nice article last year where people were kind of calling this a bit of a deadlock, right? Because you don't have a lot of supply activity, and then you have demand there, but just demand can't do anything unless things are affordable. And so it's a bit of a deadlock. And the best part about this market, I think the good news is that builders have been able to respond by building homes that people can actually afford, by offering incentives to try to help people in their first few years of home ownership. I think that's the best. That's the good news for buyers that are still out there waiting in the wings.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate your thoughts as always. Certainly we'll check in on the housing industry, pretty often on this show.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
something that
it's good every month to go into it,
yeah,
and kind of track what's going on. I find I find the subject compelling and interesting. I think a lot of people care about housing
oh, of
because
course,
it's your biggest expense every month,
that's right.
and it's also a kind of a sure way of seeing your wealth increase. Right? It's slow but steady, uh, and people like to see their housing wealth increase. They like to see that number rise slowly, right? And so I think that's why people care a lot about housing. And if you're young and you're renting, you really care because it's rent is big part of your paycheck that goes to rent every month.
Hmm.
Uh, and you have to live closer to work, especially if you're working at one of those companies that actually wants people in the office.
Physically present. Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts as always. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure you listen to Orphe and me every week on the Center Square Radio Hour.